People who have been in psych wards, what was your experience? I've had 4 admissions. I live with bipolar 2, manifesting mainly as depression, generalized anxiety, and panic disorder, so I'm an old hand at this stage. The worst part about hospital admission, and something I don't think most first-timers are ready for, is the boredom. You're not in treatment all day, so there is a lot of hanging around, and the evenings can be very long. Depending on what you're in for, treatments can be intense, or they may be bringing you in for a mental rest, and a meds trial or a change-up designed to slow you right down and take you out of the pressures of day-to-day life. Your meals are provided, so you're not worrying about cooking. You keep your own things tidy, but it's not like at home where you're getting overwhelmed by household chores and errands. Everything just kind of moves at a slower pace. It really gives you some breathing room. I found my stints in psych hospitals have taught me skills and given me tools to deal with my conditions, aside from the medication aspect of it. You might think that adult coloring books sound lame, but you would be amazed at what they do for the anxious mind. I've been educated in what panic attacks are and learned how to stave them off, had help identifying my triggers, and the intensive psychology sessions coupled with the slow pace are incredibly effective. The best thing about psych hospitals is your fellow patients. You form strong bonds there, and I have lifelong friends I've met there. It's all stripped away, and you talk freely about your mental health to each other and share things you wouldn't share with your friends and family in the outside world. I've learned that people living with mental health issues are probably the kindest and most understanding people in the world, because they get it. They get the human psyche, and they don't want anyone else to feel how they feel, so they treat people beautifully. In short, it's nothing to be afraid of, and there is much to be gained. Just bring your laptop and tablet and have some stuff loaded onto it to watch, and don't forget the headphones. Well, wow, great. For the first story, that was unexpectedly wholesome. Story 2. I was admitted twice, first time because my doc put me on anxiety meds and I had a severe reaction. Honestly, both times the ward made me feel a lot better about myself. I had severe anxiety, but it was nothing compared to people struggling with bipolarism and schizophrenia. My favorite story is about a schizophrenic we'll call Gary. Guy refused his meds, so he was on an entirely different plane of existence. He really liked to go into other people's rooms and throw things around. He made a point of going into mine, grabbing my book, taking out the bookmark, and then throwing it against the wall. One night, another patient, Brad, and I were up late watching a movie. It was after hours, but we were both quiet and well-behaved, so the nurses let us stay up a bit later. We went back to our rooms when it was done, and suddenly I hear shouting. Brad went back to his room, and Gary was in there trying to steal Brad's pants. Nurses rushed in, Gary went to leave, and Brad asked for his pants back. Gary handed them to Brad and then left proudly displaying his twig and berries. There was also a younger girl in there who suffered from psychosis who would make potions and thought she was a witch. She was writing a book about undersea vampires that she let me read. It was still a better love story than Twilight. Other than that, it was pretty quiet and really boring. A lot of people, good, kind people, are just struggling to get better. Story 3. Oh, terrible. I definitely think I came out of it more mentally ill than I entered. Like seriously, who thought putting a ton of sick people in a room would make it better? I absolutely love sharing the stories though. Some of these are mine and some of these are ones I was told by friends who had longer stays. It was the Super Bowl season and everyone was excited to be able to watch the game. The day before, everyone started to act up, not listen, cause problems, etc. And it was decided that watching the Super Bowl was a privilege and as a punishment, we would have it taken away. One boy, who I guess was an avid football fan, stood up, ran straight into the wall, and knocked himself out. We had these sticky stress toys that we could play with during therapy. People would throw them on the ceiling and it always took about 6 hours for them to fall off. They were almost impossible to get off before they naturally fell. It soon became a game to throw them on the ceiling above people's beds around 9 or 10 p.m., so the victim would get awoken by a stress ball falling on their face in the middle of the night. Our hot sauce got taken away after a girl started misusing it. R.I.P. hot sauce, I like spicy food. This one girl was furious about not having a roommate. She was too little and no one else there was even close to her age. One night, she decided that she was going to sleep in the hallway until she was given a roommate. The nurses told her that the blankets in the hallway were a fire hazard, so she had to stop. The girl put the blankets back and slept in the hallway without them. She didn't last more than a few hours. Sometimes we were allowed outdoor time. You had to be approved and everything. This girl and I liked to catch frogs together and took them back to the hospital where we were forced to let them go. One time, she just took off. I heard she made it a mile until the police found her. Story 4. My second year of college, I was 20 years old and took myself to the hospital after being told that something is definitely wrong after a sleep study for extreme sleep issues, including not going into stage 4 sleep, which is the deep rest part. The sleep center said they did not have an answer and could not help me, and 2 days later I was planning to end it all and had the presence of mind to go to the hospital instead. The hospital staff were incredibly kind. The doctors and nurses all knew I was experiencing chronic sleep disruption and what that does to a person. They were incredibly kind and did their best with the resources and research available at the time. My roommate, though, was possibly the person that showed me the most kindness in my life. She was in her 40s or 50s, I would guess, with paranoid schizophrenia, and had been in and out of the hospitals her entire adult life. She would bring me cups of tea and sit with me. My first night, I was so scared, and she just sat with me and told me the doctors and nurses were wonderful and would do everything they could to help me. She told me she felt so bad for me, being so young and dealing with this, and she knew I must be scared, being my first time having my own mind betray me. She told me that she had been in and out so much it wasn't even a little scary for her, but she just felt awful for me and how frightened I was. She told me I would be all right. I think about her often, despite not remembering her name. In the US, mental health care is limited and varies extremely from area to area depending on the resources, money, and local attitudes towards mental health. I was insanely lucky. Many are not. Story 5. I've been there 6 times. One was the state hospital, and that was terrifying. The psych patients from the local prison were there. I played spades with a guy named Smokey who was hearing voices, who was in prison for hurting a guy into a coma. They were committing insurance fraud too, lost their Medicaid certification for a few years after a nurse got essayed. The Wests were just really boring. The other patients were nice. I just drew portraits and tattoo designs the whole time for the other patients so they'd have a nice souvenir. They appreciated it. The most recent time had the craziest story. So there was a guy there whose life had fallen apart after he moved to this tiny town for a job, and a girlfriend who both ditched him. He finally checked himself in after he was intoxicated and hallucinated a guy wearing a Mike Myers mask and saying, "Where's Terry? Where's Terry?" over and over again. Anyway, he then mentioned that the town was so small there was only one restaurant, and he mentioned the Kitschy name. All of a sudden, the other guy we were hanging out with was like, "Wait, are you from?" And the name of the town. "Yeah, me too. Terry's my dealer." They figured out they lived a few blocks away from each other and then figured out that the guy in the Mike Myers mask was a particular guy who was most likely on his way to rob Terry. The first guy was so relieved. Story 6. My best friend has been in a psych ward twice for ending it all, but the first one was when he was under 18 and in our state. Anyone under 18 with mental illnesses is placed in the same facility. He was just your average kid, but severely depressed. His peers there were users and kids with really bad mental illnesses. His roommate, for example, was this big kid. He would scream at night, get violent, never towards my friend. But they'd have group sessions, and some kids were like, "I ran out of substances and tried to smoke the bed bugs." Mind you, these are kids under 18. And then my friend would say he was there for trying to end it all. He said it was pretty eye-opening as well as frightening and made him feel better about himself. Story 7. I went on my own volition to a psychotherapy rehabilitation center. I thought I'd be in and out in 2 months because I'm not as sick as others. I stayed 4 months. It was very helpful, pretty much changed my life, but 4 months isn't enough to resolve every issue. It just kickstarted my mental health journey. What I really like there is that it was okay to not be okay or to make jokes about our own quote-unquote craziness. We didn't have to worry about unknowingly offending someone or saying the wrong things because we could openly talk about all of that. This never happens in the real world. Story 8. I detoxed from alcohol in a psych ward. It was terrifying at first, and I would have sold my soul for some vodka, but the staff and other patients were super helpful. I actually got schooled on my alcoholic thinking by a huge schizophrenic guy in a bathrobe. He was very insightful and saw where I was trying to justify my drinking. The orderlies at the ward confiscated the Stephen King book I was reading when I checked in, though. Super bummer. It would have been a nice distraction from my skin crawling and the walls moving. Story 9. I was never admitted into one. My cousin was, and I hadn't spoken with him in a while. He told everyone he only wanted to talk to me. I went in there, and I had 1 hour to talk with him. My aunt and my uncle were heartbroken, and they asked me to ask him some questions for them. It was hard. It was kind of a reality check for me as I had just gone out of high school and I'd never experienced something like this. My cousin was pretty messed up, and without going into too many details, it was very difficult to have a conversation with him. Kind of put things into perspective that mental illness isn't a joke or an easy thing to deal with. Overall, my experience was like having my reality turned upside down on me. I was raised by parents who wanted to shelter me, and this whole psych ward thing was quite the game changer for me. Story 10. It was scary. Technically, I was in a 3-day detox program, but it was in the same wing as the psych ward. We were pretty much treated the same, bars on all the windows and medication for the purpose of sedation. I'm 3 years clean now, and that experience was enough to help me stay on the right track from now on. Story 11. One of the scariest, most traumatic experiences of my life. I truly believe life was a lie, that everybody was an actor playing a role to mess with me. I mean, everybody, from my mom crying during a visit because I didn't believe it was truly her, to the random workers and inpatients who were clearly making underlying threats and hidden meanings with every word they spoke, to Vincent Kompany, the Manchester City footballer on Match of the Day that night, who was speaking to me through the TV after winning the league that day. It was a real-life Truman Show / Shutter Island, and the only outcome I could see was my own suffering. I didn't trust anything or anyone, and to this day I still have lingering doubts and bouts of paranoia. This was in 2012 whilst I was suffering from psychosis after a weird session of smoking. I was only an inpatient for 2 nights, but the after effects are probably lifelong, unfortunately. Story 12. I'm a schizophrenic. I've been mistreated 3 times in the mental hospital. One girl I met said, "I just got out of jail and jail was better than this place." And that was by far the nicest mental ward I've ever been in. The others were pure hell. I'd rather be insane outside the hospital than in a place that's dangerous. The only reason someone should be in a mental ward is if you're depressed, as it's difficult to carry out those things in an environment where you have limited access to things. Story 13. Absolute crap. I was 22 and had to sign myself in for a voluntary 24-hour hold due to an outrageously dumb miscommunication. First of all, how is it voluntary when I'm told I have to do it or I'll be committed against my own will? Get there, they show me my room, give me a toothbrush, toothpaste, a cup full of shampoo, and tell me I'm welcome to go to the television room. But you can't wear your gowns outside your room at all, ever. You have to wear your street clothes. My shirt and jeans were covered in red liquid that had crusted over, so I asked if there was any way I could wash them. Yeah, sure, laundry room down the hall, but I don't have a spare change of clothes, so I can't go wash them because I'd have to wear the hospital gown. Whatever, dude, I'll just walk around like Carrie at the prom and freak out the other patients. Doctor comes in for the "why you here, do you want to hurt yourself or anyone else, etc." She doesn't understand why I'm there after I explain. I don't understand why I'm there. I ask if I can sign myself out if that's the case. Nope, gotta be the whole dang old 24 glorious hours. Screw it, I'll sleep in my room till tomorrow. Nope, she gives me a list of activities that are optional, but not really optional. Regardless of your situation, you have to show a level of participation so you can be released. So I go to all the dumb crap, make my macaroni noodle art, watch some old lady play a harp, etc., etc. I'm in kindergarten without any educational advancement. Want to make a phone call? $10 for 2 minutes. Need a shower? Here's a hand towel and 5 minutes of hot water. Want to take a nap? Good luck with miss. I only talk about armadillos, hollering useless facts all hours of the day and the night. Story 14. Absolute garbage. The psych was rude to me, said that there was no way I was uncontrollably violent. I was either choosing to do it or I had no idea what I was doing. This is false. I legitimately could not stop. She had diagnosed me with BPD because I refused to talk to her. Ironically, 5 years later, the possibility of having BPD is back on the table, but with actual good help now. They didn't let us keep contact info of the other patients, which, okay, I guess, whatever. But I wrote it in my notebook hidden among a bunch of other crap, and one day I found the pages torn out. So that was awful for my paranoia issues. I'm glad I didn't use that notebook to write about personal stuff. God freaking dang. The social worker they assigned me took my cruel mother's side, and when I got back home, I found out my mom went through all my stuff, which again was horrible for my paranoia issues. The social worker supported this. Anyway, that place is the reason I'm very scared of therapists and why my paranoia spikes hard when I leave home for an extended period of time. Screw psych wards. Man, that's horrifying. The idea that they went through his notebook in itself is horrible to think about. Story 15. I spent a week in one a little over a year ago. The actual psych ward was really interesting. We were just a bunch of people that were really quirky with some super nice nurses that just wanted what was best for us. I was the youngest person on the ward at 22, and 3 older black ladies that were also patients became surrogate aunts to me during my time. The bad part was the waiting period before I got moved up to the ward. No real beds, no real anything, and crappy food for 56-ish hours. Thankfully, at least one of my parents got to be there the whole time for that part, or I would have gotten significantly worse. Story 16. I've been in 2. The first time I was interviewed was on the second day of my stay in a general psych ward for intense treatment, and I was admitted into that ward. In the trauma ward, we had about 6 hours of planned therapy sessions and lots of outdoor time and regular appointments with a psychiatrist. It was great to not feel so different while in there. However, you get to see different personalities that can either annoy the crap out of you or you can even end up in some seriously toxic relationships, known as trauma bonds. Overall, I learned a lot and it changed my life in a way I didn't expect it to. The second time was at a different hospital and it was a complete nightmare. My ideations got worse because of how we were treated. There was a mix of mental conditions and levels of anxiety, and they automatically stuck you with a 14-day hold. Their fresh air time was a door that led to a metal box with plexiglass windows and a couple of breathing holes, and the box smelled like armpits and poop. The windows were closed in most rooms, and if you complained or fought their orders, they'd sedate you. In my 2 days there, I did not get my regular meds and was threatened by 2 nurses for asking for a room with more light, since my roommate was aggressive and didn't let me open the drapes in our room. Luckily, my husband lawyered up to get me out of there before it got worse. Story 17. I was in a juvenile psych ward when I was removed from my mom at age 15. There were no available foster beds in my entire county. I spent one night sleeping on a hospital floor, and then the random social worker told me I was going to be admitted because I had a history of depression. I was depressed because my mom was mistreating me, but okay. I became a ward of the state and was placed in a psych unit with other girls my age. 80% of those girls were foster kids like me waiting on a bed. Some had been there 6 months. There was quote-unquote school, but it was just some orderly textbook. Everyone was falling badly behind. Because we were wards of the state, we were not allowed any phone calls or outside contact. We had no money to buy even the smallest indulgences like a candy bar. Staff routinely wrestled girls to the ground and forcibly sedated them for infractions such as crying or asking too many questions. I was given a massive dose of Zyprexa because I cried after the one court-mandated visit with my mother went so terribly. She was cruel to me, even in front of staff. Foster girls had no proper toiletries for their skin or hair types. We used this industrial shampoo that just screwed all of our crap up. My room was right next to the quiet room where disobedient girls were placed with nothing else but a plastic mattress. They would scream and cry all night and hit their heads into the walls. In the 3 months I was held there, we never went outside. I never got a phone call. I did worksheets for school that never got turned in anywhere. I wasn't allowed a pen. I had to turn it in after every use. Keep in mind, I was a good student before this. I'd never been violent or disrespectful, just withdrawn and sad. The hospital was paid $1,000 per day by the foster system for housing me. I left the hospital randomly one day when another social worker showed up and told me to put my things in a trash bag. I had no time to say goodbye to any of the girls. I left the hospital on 2 medications, both very poorly titrated, so a lot of side effects. I had also engaged in unhealthy coping mechanisms. This was in 2003. In Texas, it is still happening to foster children. And if you're learning a thing or two from the story so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. When I was 14, I was forced to go to the psychological department of my local hospital. I didn't belong there whatsoever, but the police thought I was depressed. I wasn't. I kindly asked the officers to not bring me there, to which they responded they had no choice. I was put in the back of the police car and handcuffed for the duration of the ride. The first night, I was locked in a cold room with a metal bed and padding on the walls. It resembled a jail cell. After eventually falling asleep, they transported me to a traditional hospital room and kept me there with a guard at the door for a whole day. I just watched TV for 3 days after that and had occasional meetings with a psychologist, whom I told I had no business being there as a misunderstanding had taken place. I guess he finally believed me because I eventually went home. It was stupid. This whole situation didn't cause me any psychological damage or anything. I'm fine and find it more annoying and embarrassing than anything. Story 19. More trauma than the original reason I was there. I went on a weekend. First mistake. There were only 20 beds and 107 people were in the ward. I started crying and one of the aides became aggravated because I kept crying and told the nurses the noise was annoying me, so they sedated me. I was so spiked up that I repeatedly wet myself. The aides got angry and basically drenched me in the shower. Then they dressed me in front of everyone. This ward was co-ed. I hated every bit of it and would never go back. My mom requested that I be moved to the EOB pediatric ward since I had just turned 18 4 days prior. That was actually an amazing experience. Everyone is so much nicer in pediatrics. Story 20. Not great at all. I was in there a few times for my attempts as well as other issues. The nurses would routinely ask me, "How are you feeling today?" And if I said anything other than good, they'd accuse me of seeking substances, even though I vehemently refused any pills because I was terrified of being medicated. And I had absolutely no history of substance use of any kind. I was a very straight-laced kid. One nurse I had was a huge, loud guy. At the time, I was 5'5", 86 pounds, and barely 17 years old. He'd brush off anything I said and make me super uncomfortable when we were alone. I asked to have a different nurse assigned to me and even made it known to the staff that I had CSA trauma, but they just said, "You can't always get what you want." I was supposed to be on medication watch and meal watch, meaning for 45 minutes after taking meds or eating, someone would need to stay with me, and I wasn't allowed to use the restroom. They didn't even stay long enough to watch me swallow my medication. Overall, it was scary and traumatizing. Nobody took me seriously, and every nurse there was so accustomed to substance seekers and alcoholics that they automatically treated me as one. They were mean, blunt, cold, and totally unempathetic. And just to top it all off, when I told the psychiatrist that a huge part of my depression stemmed from being a trans man who hated his body, she told me, "But you still wear makeup and your hair is kind of long and you don't really seem to dress like a guy. You still wear skinny jeans. You're just delusional." Honestly, it just screwed me up even more. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. The nurses clearly don't care about LGBTQ plus youth or anyone at all. Story 21. Horrible. They knew, on top of other issues, I have PTSD from an evil stepfather, and asked to please not let men come into my room, especially at night. The male employees kept coming into my room at night to check that I was sleeping. Didn't sleep for 4 nights straight and only fell asleep because they gave me a sleeping pill. Hated it and didn't really get help. I did get a nice big bill that I'm still trying to pay, and this was 12 years ago. Story 22. I'm a veteran and a 20-year firefighter, retired. I was taken to the VA mental hospital after having a breakdown at work. I went in completely broken. I'd seen so much death and suffering in my life that I physically and mentally could not function. I will say that it did help, not completely, but enough to allow some semblance of normal. Most days were very heavy on coping mechanisms and how to realize where you are at mentally. Everything was done in group sessions. Of course, everyone there was a veteran, so it was geared towards military experiences. Throughout my stay, the doctors and therapists used the usual medicines and adjusted them accordingly. I was there for 6 weeks and have been back once. Story 23. It was honestly terrifying. I was locked into a ward full of strangers with no way of contacting friends and family beyond 5-minute calls during a short time period each night. I literally just sat around, reading the books I brought with me, and I had to go through withdrawal from my medication since they had to take me off of it. I would spend so much time in my room reading, they wouldn't call me for meals and just threw away my food. I was technically there voluntarily, but I was given the choice of either you go voluntarily or I will force you to go by a crisis counselor. Even being there voluntarily didn't mean I could leave whenever. When I kept asking to leave to be with my loved ones, they kept saying I would be kept longer if I didn't stop asking. I would walk through the night because of how scared I was, also a withdrawal symptom, and a nurse came in and was like, "Can you stop?" I would never go back. Story 24. It was simultaneously a wonderful break and a stressful nightmare. I got to stay in my PJs all day, didn't have to wear shoes, I could read and draw and talk with the other kids there. It's where I learned origami. I very much needed it and it helped me a lot. Also, the bacon was delicious and there was a cool orderly who took us outside to see the snow and played Modest Mouse for us. On the other hand, every day was a reminder of why I was there. No razors, no privacy, and sometimes the other kids there would have outbursts that frightened me. You know those heavy-weighted plastic chairs? My first night, a girl threw one across the room in the midst of her rage. I couldn't call anyone but my parents, who told me to stop feeling sorry for myself. I knew if I exposed the depths of the problems I had, I wouldn't be able to leave, so I just scratched the surface in order to get out within a week. Overall, Springwood's juvenile unit gets a 5 out of 10 from me. Story 25. My mom worked at the local hospital psych wing when I was a kid. She's a nurse. A few people got violent and one hurt a nurse, not mom. Lots of teens with ideation. She said the weirdest thing was a guy who blew out a long stream and stood in front of the mirror to watch his reflection. Just let it hang there. She said she wondered what was going on in his head. I have a friend who worked in a state hospital for a while when he was younger. He's got stories. Guy who repeated everything in threes, couple guys who kept trying to code on water, harming staff, and one guy who explored his backside rather thoroughly and suffered a cardiac event. Story 26. I don't really speak about this experience often, but I think it's important to raise awareness about what actually happens when you, quote-unquote, get help. So years ago, I was experiencing depressive thoughts and did what they told you to do. I went to the local emergency room because I was afraid I would hurt myself. From that point on, I was treated like a criminal. My personal belongings were taken from me. I had to stay overnight in ER triage where I had to be supervised. In the morning, I was transferred to a mental health facility where I was left alone in a room for most of 3 days. A doctor would come in and ask how I was feeling. I would tell them I was no longer depressed and ask if I could go home, at which point I was told I needed to be observed for 72 hours. I spoke to a doctor for maybe 5 minutes each day I was there. The only other human interaction I got was a nurse who would check to see if I was still alive periodically. I couldn't use a phone, I couldn't watch TV, I could just look around the room and count all the ways I could end it all and think if I could realistically pull it off. The other people at the facility varied from severely handicapped to people who were experiencing psychosis. I kept to myself for the 3 days with the exception of during mealtimes. They let me leave after my 72 hours were up. I felt like I was punished for being depressed. After that, I promised myself I would never, quote unquote, get help again. Story 27. Went to the ER, asked for a specific doctor. She was on the psych ward that evening. It was surreal as I didn't understand what was going on around me. This is the ER, right? Right next door, had a woman sitting outside the door. Every time the patient did something wrong, she reminded him he wasn't allowed to do whatever it was he was doing. She yelled at him all night to stop it. Upon discharge, the discharge nurse asked why I had been admitted to psych. The rest of the weirdness became clear all in that one moment. Story 28. I went to visit a friend while they were being admitted to the ward. It makes sense that the area was locked away from the rest of the hospital, but it was still a bit of a surprise to me. I was able to bring my laptop with me, but the power cable I had with me was confiscated because it was a potential hazard to oneself. If I had to describe the atmosphere, I'd say it was quiet, sterile as one would hope in a hospital, yet calm. There were multiple common rooms with some board games that we could help ourselves to. All the other patients I saw seemed friendly and not in distress or clawing to leave. The personal room was quite small, a bed, closet, a desk, and not much else. I could see how someone could get bored very easily. As my friend was recovering, they were allowed to have a weekend pass to be with their family and then willingly return to the ward. So as a visitor and not a patient, it feels like it isn't the hellhole movies and media make it out to be. All this being said, I did not go into the other psych ward that houses the few patients that have the really bad psychotic breakdowns where they are a risk to harm themselves or others. I know of this because my uncle was admitted to that part of the hospital as well. He would obsess over odd things like staring at a straw in his hands and say to my mother, who was visiting him, that if it touched the ground, the whole place would blow up and that he had to make sure that doesn't happen. Story 29. They are horrible. I went to one after an attempt and they just fed me pills while we all sat in a room doing nothing. We weren't allowed to talk to each other or anything. We had no windows and couldn't even go outside. The staff there would watch you use the bathroom and shower. On top of that, we would get damn near zero food. For breakfast, we got a slice of cold toast and 2 small sausages. That's it. It definitely isn't a good environment, especially when you're depressed. Story 30. I was put in there when a few kids who didn't like me made a serious accusation against me involving school safety. I never said I would, but since there were 3 witnesses, I was clearly going to do it even though I was a straight A student, and I had no history of disciplinary action with the school. Anyway, as soon as I got there, I started arguing with everyone about how they couldn't prove they existed. I called the one nurse, Nurse Ratchet, and wore my bed sheets like a robe and pretended to be Jesus. Within a week, the other patients hopped on board and we had this whole religious cult joke running. After 7 days, the doctor said there was nothing wrong with me and to not come back. The food sucked, but it was like a week vacation from reality for me. Story 31. I was forced into it by the police, had to do the whole mandatory 24-hour stay there. It's not just for people with depressive thoughts, it's also for people with legit other mental issues. It was kind of scary for me as you don't know who has what without talking to them. The worst part was just being there because you got a way to talk to the therapist to be evaluated, which can take hours. Then you got to talk to the doctor afterwards to see if you can be released, which can also take hours. It was incredibly boring as I had nothing to do other than twiddle my thumbs together. I did ask if they had a book for me or something as I just couldn't be sitting there with my thoughts. This was a psych ward at a hospital, not an actual facility. I'm sure if I went there instead, my experience would have been different. Story 32. It was really scary at first. I was scared of the other patients until I got to know them and actually made some bonds during my stay. However, it was hard to watch some of them go through their hard times right in front of you. Some aggression and attempted violence really scared me. They had padded rooms like you see in the movies. Luckily, I was never forced to go in one. Under my bed, there were carvings and Sharpie writings of names from previous patients and their duration at the ward. I think I remember writing my first name too on that first night. This is actually a memory I'd forgotten until now. Story 33. Both fun and scary. My ex flipped on me while other aspects of my life went to crap, so she kept calling the cops on me for no reason but the first time I was taken in for 3 days. It was terrifying because I didn't expect to be there, and when I was, they kept feeding me meds and wouldn't tell me what they were. They had rooms with 8 beds in them, but for whatever reason, I got an empty room in the women's wing. My first day there, one of the guys looked at me and said I'd probably need these and gave me a bunch of rubbers, and I was wondering what I would need those for. One of the cute night nurses came and was flirting with me for an hour in my room until another patient started acting up, so she gave me meds that put me to sleep. After that, I was becoming afraid of being taken advantage of while I was out or something. It was fun because of the cast of characters I had with me. There were three other guys my age and were relatively normal. I felt like the Jack Nicholson type, leader of the pack. They gave me the lowdown on everything since they seemed to know I've never been inside before. One of the guys was supposedly the manager of a well-known nightlife venue and gave all the guys a poker chip telling us to show them at the door for a night of free drinks and entertainment. I didn't go because if he wasn't the manager, I thought I would look crazy, showing up with a poker chip a guy gave me in the mental ward expecting a wild night. Needless to say, the girl who caused this is public enemy number one to all the other girls in my life. Glad I was only in once for a few days because you realize these places exist for a reason. A lot of these people will never leave. Story 34. I had a long weekend at an inpatient facility and oh boy was it a nightmare. My roommate was a paranoid schizophrenic who was incredibly personable and generous, but he also thought that the devil was living inside of him and that he was a time traveler inhabiting his own body, living out his memories of the present moment 40 years in the future. The dude was medicated to the gills. He took like 500 milligrams of Seroquel and some Valium at night to get him to sleep. The food was pretty gnarly, but meal times were also how you mark time during the day. I occupied my time by working out and reading. I read The Hobbit in 3 days like this. The unit had this circular structure with the offices on the inside of the circle and the rooms on the outside. Then there was a hallway that separated them, which made a walking track, and oh god, we used to walk that track for like 8 hours a day. They gave me Valium one night, and that was great, but the rest of the time they put me on Lexapro, and after that I was fine. The problem was that I admitted myself on a Friday, and it was a long weekend, so the doctors didn't get back until Tuesday, and I had to stay inpatient until they did. The best part of the day was visiting hours because I could see my family and my girlfriend. It was a highlight of my day. I always felt bad for the people who didn't have visitors. There were a few characters in there, but out of respect, I am not going to describe them here. It was mostly very sad people. Story 35. I was 14, my pathological liar mother had just attempted to end it all again, and my father was deemed even less fit to take care of me because he was that emotionally cruel and narcissistic. Child protection made the right call on that one. He's that bad. I needed to go somewhere immediately. The high-security facility for mentally ill minors was the only immediate option. On the first night, the girl in the room next to mine was just screeching like a banshee all night. The next morning, I had an emotional breakdown and they decided to just keep me there because they figured nobody would want to adopt a 14-year-old girl with mental health issues from a severely dysfunctional home. Too much trouble. This place was horrible. It looked and felt like a prison, except the wardens treated you like you were insane. After a while, you started to think they were right. Right off the bat, I was tasked with providing a sample. The next day, some doctor I had never seen in my life had a prescription for antidepressants ready and they drew for another test. I'm super scared of needles, so I passed out and they just wheeled me back to my room half conscious in a wheelchair for everyone in the open area to see. Every minute of our day was structured. We were sent to our room super early for bed at 8:30 p.m. We had to be asleep by 9 p.m. and they locked the doors until 7 a.m. No bathroom breaks. We were not allowed to take showers every day, not even when we were on our period. What we could have to eat was strictly regimented too. For example, at breakfast, we could only have one kind of sandwich topper per slice of bread, and only a certain amount. They were really stingy with it. If you stepped out of line too much, they threw you in an isolation chamber. We were only permitted a short amount of time outside under supervision. There was also a gym where we'd have physical therapy twice a week. We had to single file as we were led there and back from and to our living quarters. There were train tracks very close to that gym, and every once in a while a kid managed to get away and make a break straight for the tracks. Some kids kept track of the train schedule so they had a better chance of catching one in case they decided to go for it. Crap was straight out of a movie. Let me remind you, everybody stuck in this facility was a mentally ill child between 13 and 17 years old. Story 36. I went to visit my brother with psychosis once. It wasn't so bad there, but it was the saddest day of my life. He was so heavily medicated that he was slurring his words and his eyes were completely glazed over, and he had dribbled at the corner of his mouth. It was traumatizing. He hated it there, and when we went to leave, he tried to come with us and watched us through the doors until we had gone. In terms of the actual hospital, it was a lot of people milling around, some shouting random things. We played Scrabble with a woman who covered her face with a scarf so I couldn't see her appearance, but she seemed happy for some normal social contact. Overall, it was just a sad experience. A lot of hopeless people and obvious traumas they have suffered. Story 37. I spent 3 months in one. It's like any hospital stay, nurses, doctors. I saw a psychiatrist once a day to talk about whether my medication was working and how I was feeling. The rest of the time was really boring. We shared a common dining room, TV room, and it's there that we would talk, play cards, do puzzles. We didn't have group therapy like in the movies. Many of the patients were not at their first hospitalization. They knew everyone. What was interesting was seeing how different the patients were: teachers, engineers, administrators, students, nurses, clergymen, and sadly, a lot of soldiers. It made me realize how mental illness can affect anyone. In retrospect, it saved my life. I met a great social worker, and she helped me start a new life. So I strongly suggested, if you're feeling desperate. I tried for so many years to get over my issues all by myself, and I lost way too many years with that unnecessary suffering. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.